ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm Abhi Lahiri. You're watching Cracking Conversations, an ABP Live podcast. Joining me today in Cracking Conversation is Radha Kumar with her brand new book, The Republic Relearned, Renewing Indian Democracy from 1947 to 2024. What's up? How are you?
Thank you. I'm well. I'm delighted to be here.
It's like election festival is just around the corner. Everybody is talking about politics, this and that. And उसके बीच में we are talking about democracy. जो बुक के हिसाब से थोड़ा बहुत गायब होती जा रही है. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, it is a very depressing thought that how our democracy has been eroded over the past 10 years or so. But I also feel more optimistic now because I see that the opposition parties, which seemed to be very downhearted earlier, they've got a bit of fight in them, and this is a closely fought election, which is good to see.
Which was not the case like when they started, right?
No.
From the first phase, I guess they were just like hands down and we are losing. Now you see the momentum rising day by day.
Absolutely. And that's very good to see. Of course, you have the unseen presence of civil society who started mobilizing rather further back than did the opposition parties. But you also see all these NGOs on the ground have also come together to help in these elections.
Okay.
So those two are good things to see.
What is the book all about? When we talk about the Republic Relearned, what exactly do you derive out of it?
So when I started it, I started at a point of depression.
Okay.
That I saw our country drifting into authoritarianism, and as I say in the book, I feel that the current administration is one with totalitarian goals, by which I mean not only full control over the state, but control over society and reshaping Indian society in one particular image. And that to me was deeply distressing. And so I wanted to look for grounds for hope. And I thought that perhaps if I went back into the history of the Indian Republic since its foundation, I might find some grounds for hope. And I did find that, well, I found both hope and pessimism.
Okay.
In the sense that when I looked at the last 75 years, I found that the years of decay in our democracy were greater than the years of consolidation or renewal.
Oh.
At the period, so I identified, I'm excluding the founding years, by which I mean the Nehru administration.
Agreed, because that is more of a utopia, hunky-dory, everything is good, we have just... like the Britishers have just left India. Of course, we need time to settle up. We need time for this and that, a lot of other things. But when the politics actually came into the place, how has India changed from that time to now?
So I looked at the balance years, excluding those 17 years.
Okay.
So 58 years or so. And in those 58 years, I found that the periods of decay added up to 36 and a half years. As compared...
What do you mean by periods of decay?
So what I found was that from the initial 17 years of trying to establish a state, establish democratic institutions, try to implement the principles of the Constitution and the provisions of the Constitution. And this was a period, remember, of great political instability. The Cold War had begun. India was born in the context of a war. And partition, and then the Kashmir War with Pakistan.
Then China, Bangladesh came up.
Bangladesh was a bit later. But, so this was a period of, let us, as you rightly put it, of trying to establish and found a new country. Then what happens after that is that slowly many of the institutions that were set up at that point start to erode slightly.
Okay.
For example, you find that civil liberties start to erode. You have the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act in 1967. You have, MISA, and Makoka, and a series of acts that remove the freedom of expression or curtail it severely, that make dissent, freedom of association, and so on much more difficult. You also find greater and greater centralization of the economy, of the state economy, state control over the economy, of which you had far less in the Nehru period. In the Nehru period, you had encouragement for industry, for enterprise, along with state economic institutions.
So it was primarily decentralized, and then we were moving into the
I
more
wouldn't say decentralized, but you had private as well as public.
Okay.
Whereas then you moved into tighter and tighter state control.
Okay.
And less freedom of invention, if you like, for industry or for private enterprise. What is called
both were working in sync with each other, right? The private as well as the government.
Well, I would say that for private, for industry, it was a very difficult period. There was so much red tape, so much bureaucracy to have to get through what was called the license permit Raj.
Yeah, the license Raj.
So, permit for this, permit for that, permit for the other. So what happened, of course, this is a problem of industry possibly from the beginning, that industry relied a great deal on state support and state subsidies, even at the beginning. But at the beginning, you can understand it again because it's a new country.
Yeah.
And as I say, you didn't have this license permit Raj. So some responsibility industry too had to take. But increasingly, along with license permit Raj, came greater and greater dependency for state support in industry, which is one reason why our manufacturing base is so small in this country.
That's true.
And it's a serious problem. No country can really bring its population up if it does not have a solid manufacturing base, which even today we don't have. And we don't see enough effort being made to stimulate it. But that is a separate matter. So you see civil liberties being eroded. You see free enterprise being more and more tightly controlled. And you see that gradually there is a decay in the independence of the judiciary. The media, of course, at that point is still electronic media is all government owned.
Which is only radio, I believe, not even television, right?
Doordarshan you did have.
But that is post 80s.
No, that the freeing up of Doordarshan is post 80s. But you did have state-controlled television, I think, from the 1960s on, if I'm not wrong. We'd have to check. Both of us have to check.
I guess television came in slightly late. I guess we got television around 80, 85. I may be wrong. Okay.
I think you are wrong because I think actually the first independent NDTV was set up in 1988 or something like that.
Quite possible.
It was, the tail end of the Rajiv administration is when NDTV was set up.
Okay.
And in fact, 1977, when the emergency was lifted and what I call the first wave of democracy renewal, the Janata Alliance, they actually took steps to try to protect the independence of the media.
So let's go again back to this. Since you were saying that last 10 years has been a totalitarian rule, can we draw parallels with some other time? Like, of course, there is an emergency time where Indira Gandhi and this and that. But apart from that, is there any other time also in the history
of independent
on the
India?
independent India?
No, I wouldn't say so. I
Okay.
think the emergency is the closest comparison
Okay.
to what we have seen happening. And in fact, a lawyer called Arvind Narayan has used the term undeclared emergency for this current period.
Okay.
Of course, the big difference is that the emergency lasted only 2 years. And here we already have 10 years. So the scale and degree of damage that has been done is obviously much greater because there's been a far greater period of time over which these erosions have taken place.
For all those people who does not understand the concept of emergency, how exactly it happens in a constitution, in a state, how exactly it functions, would you mind sharing like a very crisp summary what exactly happens for all those
Sure.
millennials and Gen Zs who have no clue what exactly happens in an emergency, and what was the time actually when India has witnessed emergency in the past?
So Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency in 1975, and that was because her election had been challenged successfully in court. So it had been declared invalid.
Okay.
Her election as prime minister in the 74 election. So she called a state of emergency.
Okay, a prime minister can call the state of emergency.
Yes, well, it's supposed to be the whole executive.
Okay.
So the cabinet as well as the prime minister decides, and then they have to recommend it. Tell the president. The president has to rubber stamp it,
Right.
and so on.
And then president becomes the head of the state, basically. Army and the president becomes.
I suppose. I mean, she was the head, but anyway, a state of the prime minister does not cease to be a prime minister during a state of emergency.
Okay.
A state of emergency is called when the government concludes that all the institutions of state are incapable of functioning. So the country is in such deep turmoil.
Okay.
Normally, you might call a state of insurgency in the case of an external war.
Okay.
You can call it in a state of such internal crisis, but the framers of the Constitution did not expect it to be used in this way.
Okay.
Anyway, so she called it, and there was the Supreme Court was relatively supine. They did not accept the challenges to her declaration of a state of emergency. And eventually, after 2 years, she herself lifted that declaration.
Okay. That makes sense. What does a random guy who's just like going through this book at a bookstore, what does he get out of this book? What all anecdotes or what all pieces of research are there inside this book, which can be a mind-boggling thing for a lot of readers?
Well, I think that I can't say what would mind boggle, but let me say what I learned.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, for me, what was very interesting was to find that there had been 3 waves of democracy renewal. And what I found even more interesting was, what typifies these waves. Obviously, the first one, post-emergency, rolled back many of the changes Indira Gandhi had made to the constitution.
Okay.
And to the polity, release of political prisoners and so on and so forth, but also rollback of the 42nd Amendment,
Okay.
which gave Parliament supreme and unchallenged power.
Okay.
No one could challenge Parliament. No one could challenge the Prime Minister. So a lot of immunities were afforded to people, to the highest echelons of power, against accountability. And those were rolled back. But at the same time, what I also found fascinating was that many proposals were made in that period, which if they had been adopted, we might not have been in the position that we are today. For example, on preventive detention, there were proposals to very severely curtail it, even roll it back entirely. to say that preventive detention should only be allowed in times of external war, which is the case in other democracies.
Okay.
We are very unusual in that we allow preventive detention for other grounds as well. Most democracies do not. So that was a very important suggestion looked at in hindsight. I mean, today, when you see how many hundreds and thousands of people are taken into preventive detention for no clear or acceptable reason, the grounds are very flimsy.
And these are non-bailable
Under
charges.
under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, yes, they're non-bailable. I mean, you actually find that something like almost 3/4 of under trials, of prisoners are under trials whose trials have not been completed. So you find all of these problems. I mean, when you look at POTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, that was rolled back by the UPA Manmohan Singh administration and replaced with an amended Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Now, nevertheless, for 15 years after that, there were still people arrested who had been arrested under POTA whose the cases had not been concluded. So the act has gone, but the under trials are still there.
Because it does not affect
You
the
can't
retrospective.
you can't go retrospective, which is right and fair. But the question is, what about the trials? But the other sort of, there are so many startling facts. The number of cases that are pending in courts have gone up phenomenally, exponentially. I think at the end of the Manmohan period, there were over 30 million cases pending. Today, there are more than 52 million cases pending in courts. So justice delivery, you just look at these figures and you say, how is justice going to be delivered? Now,
And we do not have the infrastructure for it. We do not have courts. We do not have judges.
I mean, there are vacancies. The number of vacancies in high courts and district courts, again, has risen phenomenally. And bear in mind that we are amongst one of the most under-administered countries in the world.
What do you mean by that?
The norm, so we have something like 1,600 administrators, which includes all services.
Okay.
Per 100,000. In most countries, it will be 8-9 times that figure, a well-administered. The United States, which is not considered a well-administered country, has 6,000. So more than 4 times, or close to 4 times what we have. And it's not considered a well-administered country. Now, you take policing figures. The UN, I think 30 years ago, said that an acceptable proportion of police was 200 police per 100,000. We don't, Bihar has 75. We don't have to, we have less than 100.
Which is the best
140.
state? Which is the best state?
Right at this moment, I can't say.
Okay.
But interestingly, Punjab, for example, has always had a reasonably high level. But there's no correlation between the number of police
and the crime
rates, which again indicates a lack of professionalization of the police forces, that even when you do have the right numbers, you don't have the delivery.
And which is the best number in terms of country where the administration number are decent?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Those figures are not easily available.
But we are at 1,600, US is at 6,000. I'm sure Europeans must be at a pretty
Surely there must be 8 or 9 or 10.
Yeah, quite possible.
So,
and that's why I don't know about the crime rates and everything. I won't quote a random fake fact, but it looks like the crime rate is slightly lesser than us or.
People debate, the information on crimes and crime rates is collected from police stations. And of course, those vary hugely
Yeah.
in
A lot of crimes are
reporting
not
and
reported. A lot of crimes are not supposed to be written as well.
yeah,
So, like,
many are not recognized or
Recognized.
categorized correctly. So there's always a big difference on this. But I think that one can still use the police data to derive some general conclusions.
Okay.
And I think that two or three general conclusions become clear. One is that you see during the periods of democracy renewal, and this is especially clear during the Manmohan and, in fact, the previous wave of the Janta into Narasimha Rao period,
Okay.
that new categories of crime start to be recorded. It is, in fact, under Indira Gandhi's administration, her last term, 1980 to 84, that rape is recognized and registered as a separate category of crime.
What was it before?
It just fell into generally, assaults on women.
Okay.
So you have now a focus on looking at scales of
Sexual violence.
violence and reporting on that. You also see that they start reporting complaints against the police for the first time.
Oh.
And that again, that data is very interesting. By the way, now under the Modi administration, that reporting is not happening.
You can't report.
You don't get
You can,
by law you have a right to complain, but the data is not being reported in the police reports anymore. The Crime in India annual reports. So data on complaints against the police is not readily available. Similarly, there was earlier under the waves of democracy renewal, you found that data on the composition of the police forces began to be given.
Okay.
In police reports.
Like the caste structure, the gender structure,
exactly.
the gender ratio, the caste ratio.
Exactly. That data is not available anymore either.
Okay.
But those are good revealing data, and you can draw a broad brush picture. You cannot take every figure as sacrosanct, but you can at least get a very good indication.
That makes sense.
Of how. And what is very interesting to me is that I actually found that when it came to complaints against the police, the state that did the best was Maharashtra.
Oh, in the Modi government?
No, this is because the Modi government doesn't give the data on police complaints.
So this is.
But it's under Manmohan, it's
And
under
Vajpayee.
also Narasimha Rao.
Okay. Maharashtra was better.
Much. Maharashtra police has always been better than other state police forces.
Okay.
I mean, Kerala perhaps. We don't have enough information on the southern states.
Okay.
But, and Kerala surely would have a competent police force. But Maharashtra in the central and northern part is way and away the best.
You have made me counter a lot of dark clouds, but do you see a silver lining here and there?
I do. I mean, look, when the emergency was lifted, Indira Gandhi believed that she was going to win the election. There was a silent wave. I mean, nobody knew that she would be overturned in this way. But there was massive, massive defeat. Now, I don't make the comparison. I do not expect that in the 2024 elections. But the mere fact that there is a close fight is good news to me. I also believe that we have to see change coming from the states. We are not in a situation where change is going to come first in the union and then in the states.
Agreed.
It's going to be the other way around.
True.
And that is now what I'm going to be looking at even more carefully.
Okay.
We know that there are many. If you start looking at this country, you know that the southern states are far better developed in human development. They have better liberties. They have far less polarization or conflict. You see that the eastern states are ruled by non-national, by regional parties.
By regional parties.
So you can see in large chunks of the country that there is plenty of room for new shoots of democracy to appear. And that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is that when I look at the kinds of proposals that were made in these waves of democracy renewal, which, by the way, had another common factor. In each one of them, welfare legislation rose sharply, almost went back to the levels of welfare legislation during the Nehru Shastri years.
Oh,
40% of all legislation, welfare legislation. And by that I mean things like, human rights, fundamental
Yeah.
rights, right to food, right to education,
Agreed.
manual labor, domestic violence, scavenging, all of this. This happens in the years of renewal, and it becomes actually one of my determining differentials. If you look at the years of decay, you find that welfare legislation sinks to below 10%, in some cases close to 2% of all legislation.
oh man. I won't
So-
categorize anything into decay or renewable just to be politically correct. But, but for example, if the government flips and the India Alliance, they come into power, what kind of changes do you see will actually happen? Since since you mentioned, we were speaking that a lot of new crimes will start to get recognized, a lot of new welfare schemes will start to evolve. That has been the case, that has been the scene in the past. Do you see that getting repeated again? And if yes, what kind of examples do you see around?
I would say, first and foremost, I would expect to see far greater civil liberties
Okay.
than in these past 10 years. We will see far fewer people being arrested for dissent. We will see people being allowed to protest instead of being fired upon or having their houses demolished. We will see far greater freedom of association of unions and other similar professional groups. Then yes, we will see more welfare legislation. But the big issue when it comes to legislation is implementation. It's all very well to have great legislation. The test is the extent to which it is implemented. And there, I'm afraid, I think that to transform the civil administrators or the police forces, this is a long-term goal, endeavor. It cannot be achieved in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It would take at least 6, 7, 8 years. You can begin the process, but one of the biggest hurdles to implementation has always been the implementers on the ground.
That's true.
So this is where the change would have to really be worked on.
That makes sense.
It's
That makes sense. I really hope whatever you said, the society benefits out of it. The welfare of the people takes the.
May
takes
I,
the- yeah.
may I add two?
Sure, please.
I think that, two of the proposals that I thought were critical and that could make all the difference from the past. Sardar Patel, back in 1949, spoke about the need for governors to be elected, governors of states. Now, of course, as critics rightly pointed out in the Constituent Assembly, one of the problems with that is you have an elected administration. You can't have two rival elected sources of power. But you could have a governor elected by a state legislature.
That is true.
And
What we have for Rajya Sabha candidates on something like that.
that kind of thing. And that would make a huge difference.
There will be a check
Now,
of powers.
Yeah, you won't be able to misuse the governor. The governor is supposed to, yes, represent the union in the state, but only to a very limited extent. His powers are very severely curtailed. Only to really observe and recommend if there is a state of breakdown.
Right.
Now, which, as we have seen, most of the governors in recent years have far exceeded that mandate. And then the governor is also supposed to represent the interests of the state to the union. That means the state executives policies. He should be representing to the union. Now we don't. That element has gone entirely. And the governor is acting more as an instrument of the will of the ruling party executive at the union than as an objective, concerned supporter of the rights of states. So that if that change could begin, that would be huge. I would hope that any democratic alliance that comes into power would take that as a
I feel
priority.
if, for example, things change or whatever happens, there should be something around defection. Even if things doesn't
Absolutely.
change, the existing government or the opposition, somebody has to think about this. कोई आज यहाँ है, somebody moves there, then next day he is there, then again he is back. I don't know what exactly is going on.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, at the end of the day, what does a free and fair election and a smooth transfer of power mean? The will of the voter does not vote only for a candidate.
Right.
It votes for a candidate and a party
Right.
together.
Right.
Now, the general norm for defection was supposed to be that if a group of MLAs or MPs defect, then the party, the working committee, and the district representatives and so on of the party can themselves decide on whether this person should be expelled, should be suspended, should be removed from the legislature, and so on. That is no longer a point of reference.
And there should be
Now
a
the
no poach.
speak-
There
and-
should be a no poach
no,
policy.
and do you know? I mean, of course there should be no poaching, but what I find even more interesting in all of this is you look at the recent judgments of speakers. They are saying that if a majority of MLAs of a party decide to defect, then they become the real party. Now, excuse me, where is the voter in all of this? You are elected by me. I should decide whether you represent the party or not. The fact that you are a majority is irrelevant in this case. It is, you have usurped all authority.
And Maharashtra is a big example
And a
for
huge
this.
example of how tod politics, as they say. But it is disgraceful. Utterly disgraceful that people can defect, that they can immediately stand for
And let's
elections.
not make a fool of the public. Like, they are smart people, they know what they are voting for. Even if they does not, like, we are living in a democracy, that's a book all about. We have to agree to disagree. It's as simple as that. And I really want to see something coming up on the defection front, because as a voter, I'm pissed off. I'm voting for somebody and they are moving into a different party. And especially, like, if I talk about Maharashtra, that I am, the fact is flabbergasting my head. Like, boss, what is happening here?
I agree. I mean, and there really is a special tragedy about Maharashtra because it has been so clinical and cold-blooded. The way that the parties have been decimated.
There is Asli Shiv Sena, there is Nakli Shiv Sena, then there is this NCP, there is that NCP, there is BJP, there is Congress, there is like, okay, who do you vote? You have no clue.
Yeah.
Everybody should get 5 votes.
Yeah.
I guess that should be the scene.
Maybe that's the proposal.
Maybe.
Also in the Rajya Sabha, I think that for states, one of the biggest problems that we have in our present system of first past the post and constituencies on the basis of population counts is that states which are actually doing well in human development, which also includes declining populations, are at the mercy of states which are actually,
Kerala is suffering the most, I guess.
Kerala, now Tamil Nadu, and most of all of the southern belt.
So this has been, I guess, in 2026 we are due for the
new delimitation. Now, before that, I mean, I would say that the whole idea of solely population counts has to be revisited.
Agreed.
One has to think proportionality.
True.
But also, as far as the Rajya Sabha is concerned, why should not states have an equal number of seats there? You can have your population idea for the Lok Sabha, and obviously, to some extent, population has to be a base criteria.
Yes, yes.
But it cannot be the only criteria. You have to think minority representation. You already have some caste representation. You already have gender representation. I think you have to add minority. You also might need to think in terms of vote shares as well. A hybrid system where a certain weightage can be given to
There
your
has
share
to be
of
a
the
new.
vote.
There has to be a new method.
There has to be a new method.
Which
But
has
at
never
the
been explored
Rajya
anywhere.
Sabha level,
Yeah.
you don't need to have all of this.
Okay.
At the Rajya Sabha level, you can go as the US Senate does. Have an equal number of seats for every state, no matter what the population or size is, because that gives them some
Advantage.
if not necessarily advantage, it's some protection
True.
against
True.
inroads.
At least somebody will speak about them.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. Someone will stand up for their rights, which
I don't
today
know.
is.
I don't know what's going to happen in 2026 when we'll be approaching the delimitation. It has been going on and has been just push over from every 10 years, but I don't know what exactly will happen this time.
No.
Maybe a baby push over ho jaye, you never know.
This is why this election is so critical because so much is due
Because
to have.
if everything happens, if the seats are decided on the basis of population, it's going to be a big chaos. It's going to be a big chaos because for all those states who have actually promoted family planning and have controlled the population, they'll actually lose a lot to states.
Yeah. And those are the ones that have already shown how well they are doing. And one would have thought that having done that, they should have greater policy weight.
Yeah,
Obviously their
incentivized.
policies are better.
Yeah.
And they're better at implementation as well.
Yeah.
Now, if you're better, then why would I not wish your advice more than the advice of the
It should
worst?
be the opposite.
Yeah.
The more you are, the less number of seats you will get. Now see the game. That's going to be fun.
And that would be undemocratic too. But certainly a balance is establishable and should exist.
Okay. On that note, Radha Kumar, thank you very much for having this conversation. It was lovely to have this wonderful chit chat around the Indian democracy. We are actually recording when we are actually voting, like election ka season chal raha hai. Let's see what exactly happens. Do grab this copy if you really want to indulge in this conversation around the Republic of India, the Republic Relearned, renewing Indian democracy since 1947 to 2024. Thank you very much.